Prime Minister, it's been 10 years now since Georgia's war with Russia. Tell us a bit about what relations with Moscow are like today and how you balance those with Georgia's very long-stated desire for deeper integration with the West.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have a legacy of 2008, and we still have to address the issues inherited by Georgia, not only from 2008, but from the beginning of 90s. Occupation of two of our historic territories is a big problem. And of course, we have to deal with this issue with a constructive approach, but also with a principled approach, which means that taking into account the consistent policy of Georgia's European and Euro-Atlantic integration and the policy which is based on certain values, we still need to look for zones or areas with Russia which can serve as a base point in the future to start positive discussions about the political resolution of the conflict.
And can you give us some examples of what those
Those areas can be the trade, tourism, and of course, humanitarian and cultural relations. Today, the Russian market is open for Georgia, although it's not the only market for Georgia or dominant market Georgia, as our exports have been diversified. But still, it's very positive that we have around 1 million visitors from Russia every year. We have unilaterally visa-free regime for Russian citizens, and there is a single conflict on the ethnical basis with Russian tourists. So which can be a very good starting point for starting political discussions about the resolution of the conflict. But on the other side, Russia should take also into account that they should not look for a Georgian government which will get used to the so-called reality, as they like to say, of the newly independent states on our own territory. So our discussions should be based on the respect of the territorial integrity, which should be a cornerstone for every discussion in our region, and also based on the sovereign aspirations of Georgia. You asked what is Georgia's policy to address the challenges in our region, and I can answer, as President Aliyev said, of course, neighborly relations with our neighbors is very important. We have important regional projects with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, with Kazakhstan, with other countries in the region. We have strategic relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey. We have very good neighborly traditional relations with Armenia, and we have very important relations with Central Asian countries. And we have a Vice Prime Minister of Kazakhstan and all the Silk Road and all the new projects bringing new dynamics in our region. Of course, it cannot be without very close cooperation in the region, which can be a very good prerequisite for a sustainable peace. What is stability for Georgia? Stability for Georgia is positioning a country where we are. It's about values, and for Georgia, we set European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration as the strategic priority, and step by step, we are transforming our country into a truly European democracy and country which is unique in terms of openness. It's trade, it's free trade regimes with European Union and with China simultaneously, with all the neighbor countries, including with Russia. And of course, it's internal structural reforms, deep structural reforms, which make Georgia a truly democratic state. This is our Article 5. We don't have NATO protection, but partnership with the West and good neighborly relations and finding constant search for zones of common interests is the formula for stability in our region.
Now, we all know, of course, what happened to Ukraine when its negotiations with Europe proceeded a little more quickly than the Russians would have liked. I'm sure that's at the front of your mind now as you conduct talks with Brussels and your European partners. How do you manage that threat?
Well, there are threats all over, but with European Union, we have a very good dynamics in terms of bringing our country standards, democracy standards, closer to European standards. Ukraine, unfortunately, has been challenged by Russia, and their territorial integrity is violated. We are very supportive to Ukraine's territorial integrity. And again, as I said, territorial integrity should be a cornerstone of discussions in regional conflicts. This is a principle that should not be questioned. Otherwise, we will we will end up with a mess, not only regionally, but also globally, I think.
But while that's a fine aspiration, it was precisely because Ukraine was on the verge of signing an association deal with Europe that the Russians decided to move in. So as you try to move closer to the West, are there things that you can do to prevent the Russians from getting too anxious?
You know, this is about daily issues in Georgia, how we face threats from Russia. And the same is in Ukraine, although it may look different, but the formula is the same. I would like to say that we are trying to show to our northern neighbor, Russia, that the policy of Georgia to become part of the Western community is not against anybody. It's not against our neighbors, including it's not against our Russia. Russia should be genuinely interested to have a stable southern neighbor. And of course, we need to look for platforms which can be positive, where we can find common interests, where we can start positive discussions about political resolution of the problems we have inherited.
Have the Russians ever articulated what their red lines are?
Well, we hear from time to time statements about Georgia's NATO aspirations, but this is a sovereign decision of Georgian people. And again, it is not against anybody in our region.
Prime Minister, obviously no country will succeed in developing unless it gets corruption under control. Georgia has become a star in the region for its efforts in recent years. Tell us briefly what were the keys to your success, and then if you will, what are the lessons you think that Georgia can teach other countries still struggling with deep-seated corruption?
Thank you. First of all, corruption cannot be viewed as a standalone challenge among many other challenges. This is about the full complex of reforms undertaken by Georgian government. This is about openness of economy. This is eliminating trade barriers, not only tariff barriers, also non-tariff barriers. This is a constant improvement of border crossing procedures and also deep reforms inside the country. Georgia has become a chair country of the Open Governance Partnership. Last year, we received it from France. We undertake deep reforms. I was listening to Mr. Charlie, and as it was mentioned, it's like an agenda of Georgian government. You said predictability, for example. I can echo every item you mentioned. We created Investor Council, where we have all major representatives of business community, business association leaders, IFI representatives, and several ministers. We meet once in a quarter to discuss all the upcoming changes to regulations and legislation so that there are no negative surprises for business community. Everything is transparent. Digital economy. We are creating unified front office project, which is called Business House Project. It's digital and physical, both. We are detaching existing front offices from government agencies, merging them in one unit and placing them in one place physically in the capital of Georgia and also regionally in regional centers. In parallel with that, we are creating digital unified front office where we will render all the services not only for individuals, which we already have in Georgia, but also for legal entities. It means further improvement of transparency. It means further decreasing any chances for corruption, as all the services will be located physically and digitally in one space. So fiscal policy, During 2017, Georgian economy grew by 5%, 4.9%. It's preliminary data. Our tourism grew by 28%. Our exports grew by 29%, and our current account deficit decreased from 12 to 7%. Our budget deficit decreased from 4.9 to 3%. So all the data, there is very prudent macroeconomic environment. And of course, it is reflected in international rankings. Let me give you several examples. During the last 5 years, according to World Economic Forum's Global Competitiveness Index, macroeconomic environment improved by 89 positions from 137th position to 48th position. In extent of market dominance, our rankings, according to World Economic Forum, improved by 45 positions during the last 5 years, from 112th to 67th position. And we are one of the leading countries in the region. Why it happened? Because we demonopolized several important industries. In the property rights category, very key for business environment, we had 120th position just 5 years ago, 2012. 74 position improvement. We are 46th right now, according to World Economic Forum ranking. We are number 9, according to World Bank, in doing business and in corruption, anti-corruption efforts, according to Transparency International, Heritage Foundation, all major international institutions, constant improvement from 10 to 15 percentile every year in Georgia. So why it happens? This is about political will, dedication of the whole team, and of course this is not the end of the road. We consider this dynamism, not only consistency, but also pace of the reforms as the key for the success of the country. And international projects, geographic location is of course the basic and at the same time added value to everything fundamental what we do in our country. Baku-Tbilisi-Kars railway project, it changed the transport map of the country. New deep sea port construction, Anaklia port on the Black Sea shore. Engagement of Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, and Europe. Starting from China, it took 9 days for a direct train from China to Georgia, and this is a big achievement not only of one country, but of all the countries engaged.
So let's return to corruption specifically for a moment. It's obvious, as we said, that no country can become rich unless it tackles corruption. But I wonder if it works the other way around as well, which is that no country can effectively tackle corruption while it remains very poor. Is that a challenge for Georgia as well?
Well, this is a challenge, of course. Today, the level of democracy in Georgia can be challenged by the social wellness, actually well-being level in Georgia. This is a big challenge, of course, and this is a economic development and tackling the poverty issue generally in the country is the biggest challenge for the development of the country. This is why, for us, the biggest priority is to come up with special state projects aimed at decreasing poverty, eliminating poverty, and this is why we are specially focused on the startup entrepreneurs, on the special economic projects in rural areas. This is micro-grants projects. This is a project produced in Georgia, supporting startup enterprises, especially in rural areas, in several ways. In the startup period, we are subsidizing bank loans, but only for startup period, not to distort the competitive environment. This is about sharing collateral obligations in commercial banks for startup companies. This is about financing, bringing of foreign experts in the areas which is new for Georgia. It's hydroponics, it's different manufacturing directions. So this is a complex of steps undertaken by the government in order to mitigate risks coming from the general poverty in the country.
So I don't want to, yes.
I just wanted to intervene, and we're very encouraged as an industrial player in Georgia by the reforms and the quality of the reforms that the Prime Minister and his government have undertaken in the past few years. And we see clearly today the ease of doing business for an international investor are clearly there in Georgia. We see that the region, in fact, is reforming itself more and more on these matters. And I think the point on corruption is absolutely a critical point, that there be zero tolerance. That's certainly our policy, and we've seen the progress made on these matters also in Georgia. So I can only echo what's been said by the Prime Minister.
And just to return to the last part of my first question on corruption, are there ways in which Georgia can or is already helping its neighbors, using its expertise to teach lessons to those that have made less progress on corruption?
Well, let me not say helping, but we have a very good cooperation with our neighbor countries. Under the Open Governance Partnership platform, we have an excellent cooperation with all our neighbor countries. So it's sharing experience, and this cannot be a one-way initiative. It's always mutual benefit that we look for, and we should not look at other countries that, we are different. We are saying the same region. There are areas where we perform maybe better. There are areas where we may lay behind. So this is not something that we can become teachers for everyone.
That was a very modest answer. I was giving you a chance to brag if you want to, but I understand.
And also, let me echo the education point. Several years that I served in the government, being an economic minister, also as a prime minister, I have been meeting entrepreneurs who had problems when they import new technology, when they start a new project. There's always been a problem to find qualified workforce. So I have been hearing these complaints. I have a problem of finding a feeding specialist for new cows imported from Netherlands or Germany. I have a problem of the software specialists when we have a new software player, IT company coming to Georgia. We came up with an initiative of co-financing professional education together with private companies. And this has become #1 priority for our country, and generally changing the very unhealthy proportion between higher education and professional education, and to make professional education more prestigious in the country. This is the primary goal for us. We took Germany as an excellent example of dual education model. This model exists in Switzerland, in Austria. So we are drawing this experience and building a very successful professional education model in the country, co-financing it under public-private partnership schemes together with private company, responding to immediate needs of the private sector, and at the same time directly giving a channel to young generation, and not only young generation, to everyone for immediate employment after the professional education.
There's an ongoing global competition in creating norms, and the European Union is one of the norm-generating organizations in the world. Georgia clearly has made the choice of getting as close as possible to the norms of the EU. I think it'd be interesting to see from the region how influential they see European norms, what the Europeans could do better to have their norms become more dominant in the region. And,
do you want to be any more specific when you're referring to norms?
Well, there are norms in, for instance, in telecoms, there are norms. There are a number of norms that govern more and more the trade and services that are critical to the development of trade. And you see the norms, the US-generated norm, the European-generated norms. There is a convergence, but there are also differences. And so it'd be interesting to see how the various countries see that issue, and also the perspective of business on that.
Who wants to start?
Well, just very briefly, I will say that in a medium or maybe a little bit longer prospect, Georgia sees himself as a full member of European Union. So we decided for ourselves to embrace all the regulations and norms of the European Union. But we have a gradual approximation agenda and action plan which envisages implementation of European norms according to a schedule we have. Now we came up with even a more rigorous agenda to go beyond the schedule and be ahead of the schedule for 2020 in terms of implementing European norms. So far, we have only observed positive dynamics accompanied by implementing European norms, as it opens new opportunities for us for exports to European market, not only goods but also services. So according to our association agreement, deep and comprehensive free trade area agreement, we are able to sell our products and services tariff-free to European market. Why is it so important? Because it cannot be important if we consider it as a standalone free trade agreement. In addition to that, we have free trade agreements with EFTA countries, with Switzerland and other EFTA countries. We have free trade agreement with all the neighboring countries and with China. I remember when we started negotiations with China of free trade agreement, degree of skepticism and fear inside the country among the local business representatives, that it may ruin the prospects of industrial development in Georgia. It did not happen. We have a quite opposite trend in Georgia. Chinese companies are eager to consider Georgia as a base or platform for manufacturing, at least partial manufacturing of goods, to sell the goods to European market and vice versa. We had a number of meetings today with Indian companies. Indian companies are interested to open branches in Georgia for business outsourcing, which means that there are more prospects from opening up for international trade than drawbacks. This is what Georgia's experience shows, and this is an absolutely empirical evidence of the benefits of free trade based on the example of Georgia. Thank you.